"Where were you 20 years ago?" she asked, and then she laughed, but her hands were shaking around that cup of coffee, and I knew she didn't mean it as a joke at all. My name is Wade Calder, and I was 34 years old the winter I finally worked up the nerve to cross the fence line between my land and hers. Her name was Constance Whitfield, though the folks in Millbrook Hollow just called her the widow on the hill, said with a kind of pity that made my stomach turn every time I heard it. She'd buried her husband Thomas 11 years back, thrown from a horse on a morning so ordinary that she told me later she remembered nothing strange about it at all, not one warning, not one sign. One minute he was riding out to check the north fence, and the next a boy from town was standing on her porch with his hat in his hands, unable to say the words. I knew grief. I wore it like a second skin. My wife, Eliza, had died giving birth to our son, and the boy hadn't lived past his first breath either. And that was 9 years gone by the time I found myself standing at Constance's woodpile with an axe in my hand, and no earthly reason to be there except that I'd seen the smoke from her chimney thin out to almost nothing for 3 days running, and something in my chest had gone tight and wouldn't let go. I want to tell you plainly, I wasn't a brave man. I'd spent 9 years keeping my head down, working my acres, going to church on Sunday, and sitting in the back pew where nobody would ask how I was faring, because I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break in my mouth. But there's a particular kind of cold that gets into a person's bones in a Kansas winter, the kind that makes you notice when a chimney isn't smoking right, when a woman hasn't been seen at the Mercantile in near 2 weeks, when a house sits quiet in a way that houses shouldn't sit. So I walked over, just like that, no plan in my head at all. She came to the door in a shawl too thin for the weather, and her face when she saw me was somewhere between surprise and suspicion, like she'd forgotten what it was to have a visitor and wasn't sure she liked the idea of remembering. "Mr. Calder," she said my name careful, like she was testing whether I belonged on her porch at all. "Something wrong with your fence line?" "No, ma'am. Noticed your wood pile's running low. Thought I'd split some for you, if you don't mind the company." She looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. "I can manage my own wood, Mr. Calder." "Didn't say you couldn't." I was already walking toward the pile because if I stood there arguing, I'd lose my nerve entirely. Man likes to keep his arms working in winter, keeps the blood moving. She didn't argue further, but she didn't thank me either, not that day. She stood in the doorway a good while, arms crossed tight, watching me swing the axe like she expected me to give up or do myself an injury, and when neither happened, she went back inside without a word. I split wood until my shoulders ached and stacked it neat against her wall, and when I finally walked home in the blue dark of that early evening, I told myself I wouldn't do it again, that I'd overstepped, that a widow living alone didn't need a strange man showing up uninvited with an axe. I did it again 3 days later. This became the shape of that whole winter. I'd walk over, sometimes with a reason, sometimes without one at all, and I'd chop what needed chopping, mend what needed mending, and she'd watch me from windows and doorways with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between gratitude and something sharper, something that looked almost like anger, though I couldn't work out what she had to be angry at me, for it was the middle of January when she finally spoke more than a handful of words to me. I'd come by after a hard freeze, found her back door frozen shut, and spent near an hour chipping ice off the hinges while she stood inside calling out instructions through the gap I'd managed to open. "You're wasting your Tuesday on my door, Mr. Calder." "Got nothing better to do with a Tuesday, Mrs. Whitfield." "Everyone's got something better to do." "Not me." I got the door loose finally, pushed it open, and there she was standing in her kitchen with flour on her hands from bread she'd been kneading, and for the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't looking at me like I was a stranger with an axe. She was looking at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't asked to be given. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked. Not unkind, just honest, in a way that caught me off guard. I didn't have a smooth answer. "Saw your chimney wasn't smoking right." That was 3 weeks ago. You've been back 6 times since. Counting, are you? Her face colored a little, and she turned back to her bread dough like she needed something to do with her hands. A woman notices things, living alone. I stood there in her doorway with cold air pushing in around me, and I said the truest thing I had. I lost my wife 9 years back, and my boy with her, and I spent all that time thinking the kindest thing I could do for anybody, including myself, was stay out of the way. Didn't figure out until this winter that maybe that wasn't kindness at all. Maybe it was just fear wearing a decent coat. She went still over that bread dough, didn't turn around for a long moment. When she did, her eyes were wet, though she'd have denied it if I'd said so. Thomas used to say I talked too much, she said. Now I go days without saying a word to another soul, and I've near forgotten how my own voice sounds. Sounds fine to me, I said, and that got the smallest laugh out of her, cracked and rusty like a gate hinge, but real. That was the turning, though I didn't know it right then. After that day, she started leaving the door unlatched on the mornings she knew I'd come by, started having coffee ready. We didn't talk about anything of consequence for a long while, just weather and crops and the foolishness of the Hollister boy who kept letting his cattle wander onto other people's land. But there's a kind of talking that isn't about the words at all, and that's what we were doing. Both of us circling something neither one of us was ready to name. Word travels fast in a small town, and not always kindly. It was Constance's sister-in-law, a sharp-tongued woman named Prudence Hale, who brought the trouble to a head. She came by Constance's place on a Sunday in February, and I happened to be there mending a hinge on the barn door, and I heard every word through the open window whether I meant to or not. People are talking, Constance, a widow letting a man onto her property near every day, alone in that house with him. What do you suppose Thomas would say? Thomas is dead, Prudence. Constance's voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. He doesn't get an opinion on what I do with my woodpile or my company. It's not just talk about you. It reflects on the whole family. And what do you know about this Calder, really? A man his age, unmarried all these years since his wife passed, coming around a lonely woman with money enough to matter. I don't have money enough to matter, Prudence, and you know it. This farm barely feeds me through winter. Then what does he want? The silence after that question stretched long enough that I set down my hammer and just stood there, waiting, my chest tight in a way I recognize now as fear, plain and simple. The fear that she didn't have an answer, or worse, that she did, and it wasn't one that included me. I don't know, Constance finally said, quiet. But I know what it feels like when he's here, and I know what it feels like when he isn't. Prudence left in a temper, her buggy rattling down the frozen road like she meant to outrun her own bad mood. And I stood in that barn a long while before I found the courage to walk back to the house. Constance was sitting at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup gone cold, and she looked up at me with an expression somewhere between embarrassment and defiance. You heard that? Some of it. She's not wrong to wonder, I suppose. Constance turned the cup slow in her hands. A woman alone, letting a man come and go as he pleases. It doesn't look proper, and I don't rightly know what to tell people, because I don't know what this is myself, Wade. It was the first time she'd used my given name. It landed somewhere under my ribs and stayed there. I could stop coming, I said, though the words tasted like ash even as I spoke them. If that's what would ease things for you. Is that what you want? No. I sat down across from her because standing suddenly felt like too much distance. I've buried a wife and a son, and for 9 years I told myself the safest thing was to want nothing, because wanting things is what breaks a man. But I want to keep coming here, Constance. I want to keep hearing your voice sound less rusty every week. I want to keep watching you laugh even when you try not to. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just telling you the truth of it, because you deserve the truth more than you deserve my silence." She didn't say anything for a long moment, and I thought maybe I'd said too much, moved too fast, ruined the fragile good thing we'd built out of wood piles and coffee and small talk about the Hollister boys' cattle. Then she reached across the table, slow, like she wasn't sure her own hand would obey her, and she covered mine with it, her fingers cold from the cup. 20 years ago, I was 26 years old and foolish enough to think Thomas and I would grow old together in this house, gray-haired and settled, and nothing bad would ever find us here. Her voice wavered but held. I never imagined a life without him, so I never built one. And when he died, I didn't know how to start building anything at all. I just closed up, like a house shut for winter, and I stayed shut for 11 years. "Constance, where were you 20 years ago?" Wade called her. She laughed then, but it broke halfway through, turned into something closer to a sob, and her grip on my hand tightened. "Where were you when I needed somebody to remind me a person can still choose to open a door?" I didn't have an answer that would satisfy either of us, not one that would undo 11 years of her sitting alone in that house with the shutters closed against the world, so I didn't try to give one. I just held her hand across that table and let her cry the kind of tears that had been waiting a long time for permission. And when she was done, I said the only true thing I had left. "I don't know where I was 20 years ago, but I know where I am now. And I'm not planning on being anywhere else, if you'll have me." That should have been the end of the hard part, but life rarely arranges itself so neatly. Prudence didn't let the matter rest. She went to the church elders, spun a story about impropriety that had more shape than truth, and by the second Sunday in March, half the congregation was watching Constance and me with the kind of careful, sideways attention that feels worse than open hostility, because you can't argue with a look. The minister himself, a decent enough man named Reverend Path, took me aside after service and told me, not unkindly, that perhaps it would be wise for appearances' sake if I found less occasion to visit the Whitfield place. For appearances' sake, I repeated, and something in me that had stayed quiet and careful for 9 years finally stood up straight. "Reverend, with respect, I've spent near a decade minding my own grief so carefully that I forgot how to live at all. I'm not minding it anymore. If the town's got a problem with a man helping a lonely woman keep her house warm and later, God willing, asking to court her proper, then the town's problem isn't with me. It's with its own narrow notion of what kindness is allowed to look like." I don't know if it was brave or reckless saying that to a minister in the churchyard with half the congregation still filing out behind him, but I said it, and word of it traveled through Millbrook Hollow faster than any gossip Prudence had spread. Constance heard about it before I even got the chance to tell her myself. She came to my place that same afternoon, walked the whole way in a wind sharp enough to cut, and stood on my porch with her cheeks red from cold and something else. "You said that? In front of the whole church?" "I said it." "Wade, you've made yourself the talk of the county over a woman who can't even promise you she knows how to love again without being afraid of losing it." "I know exactly what I've made myself." I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the wet at the corners of her eyes hadn't come from the wind alone. "And I'd make myself that 100 times over, because I'm done being careful, Constance. Careful cost me 9 years I can't get back. I won't let it cost me you too." She didn't answer with words. She answered by closing the distance between us herself, and there on my porch, with the wind pulling at her shawl and the light going gold and low behind the fields, she kissed me like a woman finally letting a door swing open after 11 years of keeping it shut against every draft that came near it. The wedding happened that June, small and plain, in her own front yard under an old cottonwood tree that Thomas had planted the year they married, because Constance said she didn't want to erase what came before, only to build something new alongside it. And I understood that better than most men could. having buried a family of my own. Prudence didn't come, though most everyone else did, including Reverend Path, who married us himself and told me afterward, quiet, that he'd been wrong to counsel caution over kindness, and that he hoped I'd forgive an old man his narrow thinking. I moved my few head of cattle onto her land, and we made one farm out of two, and some mornings now I wake up before the light and find her already at the stove, humming some tune I don't know the name of, and I stand in the doorway just watching her, the way she used to watch me from her window that first winter. Except now there's nothing careful or suspicious in it at all. Just a kind of ease that took two broken people a long, cold season to build. She still asks me sometimes, mostly in jest now, mostly with a smile that doesn't crack the way it used to, where I was 20 years ago. And I tell her the same thing every time because it's the only true answer I've ever had. I was waiting on you. I just didn't know it yet.